here we are with Heather Chauvin today. I'm so excited. I was a guest on her podcast, and immediately during our discussion, I knew I had to have her come be a guest on The Only One in the Room because of her story. Welcome, Heather. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Laura. I'm so excited to be here and nervous to have this conversation, but it's one that needs to be had.
Mm.
I think so. I really do. And I'm just going to let our listeners know. Heather, where are you?
Well, right now I'm in the woods, but I'm in
Yeah.
Ontario in Canada. Yeah.
Yes. So Heather's in the woods in Ontario in Canada, and we have a bit of a delay. So you may hear me talk over her occasionally, or you may hear, um, us overlapping, or it may sound like a delay. So just we're going to do our best here because the conversation, like Heather said, is really important, and we definitely want to capture it for you. Heather, my first question to you is, what's the most important piece of furniture in your house? Scotty and I just bought a house. We're moving, and so we're trying to like figure out what to keep and what to give away or to put on Facebook Marketplace. And I was just curious, what's the most important piece of furniture in your house?
Literally, the first thing that came to mind was my bed. I need a good quality bed. So much magic happens in the bed, and if it is shit quality, it's going to ruin your life.
Yes,
I'll
I
concur.
completely agree. Yes, we both concur. If we have nothing else, we need a bed.
Yeah. Good sleep can
Uh,
transform your life.
right? It really can. It makes all the difference in the world. Um, Thank you. Thank you for that, Heather. I am Laura Cathcart Robbins, and this is the only one in the room, but I'm never the only one in this room because, as usual, my boyfriend, producer, and co host, Scott Slaughter, who I call Hun, is here as well.
Hi, honey.
Hey, Hun. So, like I said, we're talking to Heather Chauvin. She is a leadership coach who helps successful women courageously and authentically live, work, and parent on their own terms. And there's such a deep story here. So, um, I'm gonna ask you, Heather. And your bio is longer than that, but like I said, we're gonna talk about so many things that are in your bio. I don't want to spoil anything that we're gonna discuss up front. But I wanted to talk about just growing up because when you and I talked, you were telling me about your sister who has cerebral palsy. Is it cerebral palsy or cerebral?
My oldest sister, who has like a mild case of cerebral palsy. Yeah.
Cerebral palsy. And the reason that you brought it up is because other people were making fun of her when you were little.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I remember, well, kind of reflecting and looking back on my life. I love advocating for people who don't have a voice, and I didn't know why. I always had this like internal desire to stick up for people. And then when I was reflecting back on like, but what is the why? Um, I'm the youngest of four, and when I look back on my life, it wasn't a known thing. It was just that thing that I was her little sister, and yet I could see that she was vulnerable and people would pick on her all the time. And I started to like, yeah, just even though I was tiny in stature, I started to really like make myself bigger and use my voice for her and kind of stick up for her when she didn't have the capacity to do so.
Yeah, that's in my notes, always advocating for others. And you mentioned like at recess you learned sign language so that you could
Mm-hmm.
communicate, right, with the hard of hearing.
Yeah, I didn't know that. It's so funny because when you start to look back on your life, you realize, huh, those little pieces of yourself are always there. And I remember learning how to sign so I could connect with this little boy who, at the time, I believe. if I look back, was diagnosed with autism. I don't know what his full diagnosis was, but I just remember the teacher seeking volunteers and I put my hand up. And again, no idea why. I just wanted him to not feel like he was alone and that he had a friend. And I was more than happy to spend, I actually got more out of that, like spending quality time with him during recess than going outside and being with my friends.
Yeah, I love that. And I think I told you when we were talking that in my early 20s I took ASL classes just because
Mm-hmm.
one, I think it's beautiful, but two, I wanted to be able to communicate with people. I also took um, um, a literacy course so that I could teach functionally illiterate adults to read. And this was, I was like 21, 22. I don't know what I was doing, but this was my calling. So I really connected with that being something that was innate for you, that maybe didn't make sense to the outside world, but it was just who you were at that time,
Mm-hmm.
and then still at this time. And we'll talk more about that too. But uh, you got pregnant at 18, right? And that's not incredibly unusual, but it's, for me, that's really young. That's like a really young age to be pregnant. And can you tell me about that and tell me about the baby's father as well, your relationship with him?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I remember finding out about 3 weeks before I was to graduate high school that I was pregnant. It was to my current boyfriend at the time, who was somebody I did not want to spend the rest of my life with, and I knew that innately. And the second I found out I was pregnant, I immediately went into this like fight or flight state of I need to figure this out on my own. My boyfriend at the time was a drug addict and alcoholic. I knew there was substance abuse issues, but I didn't know to the extent. After my pregnancy, things got worse, and I realized how bad his drug abuse was, and his mental health. And I just decided to raise our son by myself. Um, I went and went back to school, post high school, went to post secondary. Later on, years and years later, he died of a drug overdose, and it was really,
Mm.
um, it was just this moment of like, it was me and my son against the world, and I really felt like I needed to protect him from his father, but not from a like abuse way, but from a helping his father have his space to heal, but knowing that that was not going to be healthy for him growing up. So making really,
Right.
really hard decisions to do that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's when you're dealing with substance abuse of any kind, there's no predicting, and it's heartbreaking. It really is. And that was,
Mm-hmm.
some of what our conversation was, because I was on the other end of that. I was the heartbreaker. Um, and I've also had my heart broken because now I'm in this world where this is the work we do. And it's so to be that young and to intuitively know that, one, this can't be your forever relationship, and but the baby could be. Like, how did you knew you didn't want to be with him? Why were you so sure that you wanted to keep the baby?
Mm. I really don't know where that came from, to be honest with you, because the when I found out I was pregnant, my first thought was I asked myself, am I going to keep this baby or not? And there was just this internal knowing of yes. And I remember making the decision and then knowing like this is if I'm going to make this decision and I'm going to have this baby and raise this child, that's it. Like I need to be all in, to an
Right.
extreme, because there's
Yeah.
also this like primal instinct that kicked in for me, which is I already feel like I'm failing as a mother. I'm doing this
Mm.
backwards. And if I already feel like I'm failing, I need to overcompensate, which then kind of shoved into this like ambition and this overachiever. And then
Mm.
culturally, I'm getting pats on the back for my ambition, for my drive to not become a statistic. And I'm using air quotes, like not become a statistic.
Yeah.
Um, I'm going to read the books. I'm going to get educated. I'm going to do all of that. But yeah, it was almost like once I made that decision, I put blinders on, but I put myself in a bubble. I was very angry. Um, there was lots of judgment around me, and I just became laser focused and hyper independent because of it.
Wow. Wow. And at first you live with your mom, right?
Hmm. Yeah. My
Yeah.
mom
And
and I
then yeah.
had my mom and I had a challenging relationship. As now that I'm raising a teenager, I understand how incredibly challenging it can be at that time. And I could tell that she, in hindsight as a mother, I can see, I don't know her whole experience, but I could probably see how embarrassed she was, ashamed, like the things that would have come up for her of
Mm.
like, how did we get here? But also the anger and not knowing how to like connect with me, like on a human level, like emotionally connect with me. Um, and I remember I was probably about 10 days before my due date. And she finally said, "You can stay here." But before that, I was trying to look for housing and figure out how I was going to afford it. Um, so it wasn't an easy transition into motherhood at all. But yeah, once she let me stay there, then I lived with my mother in the basement, raising my son, and eventually was able to go to school.
Wow. Wow. I mean, that's pretty incredible. It really is. When I think of motherhood, I think of sacrifice. And I think that some people are willing to make those sacrifices and some people aren't. And I would like to not to have any judgment around that. But I just hear you making sacrifices so that you can move forward and be an independent unit with your son, and
Mm-hmm.
it was like you said, the two of you against the world. Um, I'm going to read something that you wrote. You do not need to be diagnosed with cancer like I did to realize that motherhood shouldn't suck the life out of you. In fact, I'm here to prove to you that the more alive you feel, the less exhausted, irritable, and frustrated you'll be. I love that quote. Tell me about how old you were when you got your diagnosis and what that was like for you.
Yeah, so it's interesting you talk about sacrifice because I believe part of what got me to my diagnosis was buying into that belief. There is those moments of like giving things up for our children and challenging and pushing yourself. But I think we take it to an extreme sometimes of what sacrifice looks like, sacrificing our mind, our body, our soul. And so it was December 21st, 2013, a few days before Christmas.
Mm.
And I went into the hospital. My abdomen was swollen. And I've been complaining at this point for mild back pain and abdominal bloating and just complaining. And my husband, who has been in my son's life since he was 18 months old, and we
Oh
have two
wow.
additional boys together, um, he at the time was like, "I'm bringing you to the hospital." So he knows that, our partners, when they see us complaining about certain things, they're like, okay, she's not herself. So he brought me to the hospital because the first night I went, and I remember walking in thinking, I don't belong here. I am not sick enough. And
Mm.
so I went home. The wait was too long. Go back the next day. He drives me. He's like, if I have to sit next to you to make sure you don't run away, we're going to do this. And you are not leaving the hospital until you are seen. And I went in. They did a CT on my abdomen and blood work. And of course, after hours of waiting on the spot, told me that I had cancer. They just didn't know what type. It turned out to be a stage
Mm.
4 sporadic Burkitt's lymphoma, and that was the tumors. There was a whole bunch of tumors in my abdomen, which is why it was bloating, and now it was like rapidly growing. And so at that point, I was in a crisis state. It wasn't a slow growing cancer. It wasn't stage 1. So they had to take quick action. And that's where I had to start advocating for myself to get the support that I needed. Because I truly believe I wouldn't be here where I am today without that advocacy.
Wow. And just going back to your husband insisting that you go, do you know what he thought was going on? Did he know that this was something bad, or was he was obviously worried, but what was he thinking then?
It's so funny because I'm like, did I ever ask him that? But if I did ask him that, he would probably be like, I don't remember. That was so long ago.
Right.
I don't know if he was actually worried or if he just knew something was up because he trusts me. So he knows that when I'm complaining about something, I'm being stubborn or I'm prolonging it. And so, yeah, I don't think he was worried, but I think he knew, like, she's clearly in pain because she wouldn't be complaining like this. But I don't think he had, I don't think he deeply knew how uncomfortable I was or what was going on. And even paying attention to the abdominal bloating, at that point, I thought, oh, something's going on. Maybe I have a gluten allergy. My youngest one was a year old. And I thought at that time, my body's still going back. Like, I had no idea. I was so disconnected from my body.
Right. Well, and this was your third kid. So a year isn't outrageous for your body to still be returning to, or whatever. I don't think our bodies completely returned to what they were, but your body to shift to where it was going to be. So that I would have probably thought that too. I don't know that I would have gotten, that checked out. I say, I think I say it in Stash My Life in Hiding, but I say it when I talk, that I had this fantastic life, but I was dying inside, from the addiction. But you were literally dying, and you had what looked like a really good life at that point, right?
Yeah. I mean, it looked like I was in startup in my business right before my diagnosis. I officially left my job as a social worker, like signing the line to know I can't come back. My safety net was gone. So not only was I in startup, had 3 boys, married, but now here I am, like on the up and up. But inside, I felt like I was dying. I was exhausted, like physically exhausted. I was mentally overwhelmed, spiritually depleted. And I was starting to seek help. Like, I was reading the books, I was listening to the podcast, I was trying to seek help. And I remember looking at people thinking, help me. Like, is that like just, right below, like when you're treading water. And as I'm seeking help, people are like, honey, this is mothering. Honey, this is adulthood. Like, suck it up, buttercup. And I thought, not this, not this. And so it was almost like I was like clearing my throat. And then my post-cancer diagnosis, I was like, I checked this box. I'm like, I am done with this shit. I am done suffering. I am done with struggle. I am done believing that other people have a better answer when deeply, like, my intuition is screaming at me to do something.
Yes. Well, I mean, and it's so, I was just talking with somebody about this, like how you advocate for yourself. Like, I think for me, after my second son was born, I went into the doctor seeking a diagnosis of postpartum something. When he said I didn't have it, I didn't push, I didn't advocate for myself. And I tried to dismiss it myself. So I abandoned myself in that moment. And then in advocating for yourself in life, is one thing. Advocating for yourself in the medical community is something else entirely, because when I know that somebody has something serious going on, if they're a friend of mine or a relative, and I'm in proximity, I will go with them to that appointment, because I know that a second set of eyes and ears is helpful. You told me, I think, and tell me if I have this wrong, but that you were, during this period post-diagnosis, you were angry at your husband because he didn't rescue you. Was that right?
Yes, I
Can you
was.
talk a little bit about that? Yeah.
I remember at the time being in, I'm going to say startup, but thinking my husband is going to solve my problems for me. My husband is going to somehow dig deep and figure all of this out, like the knight in shining armor. And I was so, so angry because, well, one, I could really see how I was buying into the belief of the male versus female role, but also expecting somebody else to rescue me when I was the one who needed to rescue myself. And that what was really being shown to me were
Mm.
some deep, deep beliefs and fears that I had, that I was incapable of achieving what I wanted and desired in my life. And so I just kept constantly projecting my fears onto him over and over and over again. It was so terrifying to turn it back on myself and think, I need to rescue me.
Yeah.
I need to figure this out. He can be here to hold me accountable and support me, but I am the one who needs to rescue me.
Yes. Yes. And so the big thing that just kind of stunned me when you said it was that you didn't think you'd be alive if you weren't white. And for us, I completely got that. I've been watching how like the maternal mortality rate in the States for Black women is so much higher than it is for white women. Black women aren't listened to the same way. We don't get the same level of treatment, even when all the other factors are the same, like where we live, where we come from, the amount of income, et cetera, et cetera. In fact, Black women with higher income levels are given worse treatment. And then the reasoning they think for this is that there's like a know-it-all-y like perception, like, oh, this one thinks she knows everything, so I'm not going to, the more articulate she is, the wealthier she is, I'm not going to allow her to have that. And so that's just with Black people. It's also for Latinx people. It's also for members of the Asian community. And this, I'm just talking here in the States. So tell me, because I know you have a stepmom that is a nurse or was a nurse, and so this was one of the things that helped you, the access. You had access that other people didn't. But tell me why you said that to me, and what that looked like.
So, okay, so one, I'm coming from a completely different healthcare system, still has issues. Two is advocating for myself has never been an actual issue. I've never been concerned of the color of my skin, opening my mouth and advocating for myself. Not even something that crossed my mind ever. Number three is growing up where I live, it's a small town feel, and there's always, not always, but typically, if you know someone who knows someone who knows someone, you are getting access to resources that other people do not have access to. And so when my diagnosis happened, when I went to the hospital, when I went home and they're like, you have cancer, going through the system at the amount and the rate that the cancer and the tumors were growing in my abdomen, they were going to prolong my treatment because of the holiday season. And it was my mother-in-law, who was a retired oncology nurse, and my stepmother, who had connections within the hospital, who were calling people to get me back into the hospital. And I started treatment early because of that. People just signing papers and getting me through, kind of like through the ropes and through the system. And I thought, in the moment, I had no idea, because I had the community, the support around me, who were making the calls and doing the things. But after, in hindsight, I remember not only just having those connections, but having the courage and the ability to use my voice and not being afraid to use my voice to advocate for what I needed. Is something that I know in my bones I would not have had access to or had the privilege to do that because of the color of my skin.
Mm.
And of course, I don't understand other people's experiences or where they're coming from or what that looks like, but I've seen it again and again. Previously, I used to work within the child protection system and what that looked like for people trying to advocate for their children. And I thought, this is not okay, that I can use my voice and get what I want, or I have a connection, and I am just one of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. What about the people who don't have the connections? What about the people who are afraid to speak up and use their voice because of the, you know, the negativity that will happen when they open their mouth and speak their truth?
Yes, speaking as a woman of color, sometimes I'm not afraid to use my voice. I'm just exhausted by the many times that I have and I haven't been heard.
Mm.
And sometimes for sure it's fear. But oftentimes it's just like, why should I say something? Because no one ever listens.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, it falls on deaf ears over and over and over again. And then you see other people getting heard, people of the dominant culture getting heard. And so then it's systemic, and it doesn't look like you can beat the system, or it didn't look like I could beat the system, I'll say. Thank you for voicing all that. I think it's really important, and that voice is a privilege, or the lack of fear around using your voice is a privilege. And I don't know that a lot of people recognize that. I come from a lot of privilege, regardless of the color of my skin. I have a lot of privileges that a lot of people don't. And I try to keep that in front of mind, at top of mind, because I want to make sure that I'm not taking it for granted, that I don't think that I've been owed this in any way, because I haven't. These are things that were granted to me as a result of socioeconomic status, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that awareness is the first step to creating more access for people who don't have it, and or creating pathways for people to have that same access. I mean, they can have the mother-in-law and the stepmom always. Mm-hmm. That's fantastic that you had that. What was the prognosis with the diagnosis you were given? How long did they think you would live without intervention?
So without intervention, the prognosis is not good. But with intervention, the remission rate was pretty, like, to go into remission and stay there was pretty high. And then it was usually within the first year, if something was going to lapse, that's when it was going to happen. So I took whatever my doctor said, as I was like, okay, you said I have 9 months to work towards and get out of the woods in 9 months. But because it was almost like if I didn't start treatment, that's when things would have went down very, very quickly. And that was the critical moment, was before I started treatment. But then even having the opportunity after, that in itself for me was interesting, because I came from the space of the wellness space, the holistic space, right? People literally telling me, if you're going to inject that poison into your body, it's going to kill you. And thinking, I don't have the opportunity. I don't have the space. I have nothing, right? Here, I I don't have the resources to go to a freaking retreat center in Mexico and try to figure this out. I have to surrender to the people that are around me that are the quote unquote professionals. But what do I have control over? What can I manage? What can I do after this? And I just remember after that thinking the amount of energy and effort required to become, right? Like, who do I want to be after this? And trying to not only heal and get into remission, but thrive after that. That in itself was a whole other phase. Nobody taught me. No one talked about it. It was like, okay, you're done. Go live your life. I felt like I was dropped into the middle of a country and a culture I didn't understand. And I had to figure it out on my own.
Wow. I love that image, because you're right. No one ever talks about that. It's like you're released back into whatever, and you've never been there before because you're different, right?
Yeah.
You have to be different after an experience like that. How long has it been now since then?
This December, it will be 10 years.
10 years. Wow. Amazing. That's so good to hear. Tell me what you decided to do with your life post-diagnosis, post-treatment, post-remission.
So before my diagnosis, I was talking about parenting. I left my corporate job and I was supporting women, helping them see and understand their children's behavior. And at that point, women were telling me, I don't have time for this. I don't have the energy to implement these things. My marriage is falling apart. My career is falling apart. And it was post-diagnosis when I was like, ladies, we need to stop pretending it's just about the children all the time. And so since then, I have been digging deeper and helping women to stop abandoning themselves and to ask themselves, how do you want to feel? And learning to reverse engineer that. And so it can be parenting that brings us to our knees. It can be a relationship. It could be our health. But there's these buckets of your life that are going to challenge you to look at who you are in the mirror. And then, and then we get to reverse engineer how we want to feel. So the last decade I've dedicated to learning how to live, learning how to not only live, but feeling alive and what that means from the inside out.
Yeah. You wrote to embrace your fully authentic self, to feel 100% alive, and to fill your own cup to overflowing. Because when you do, your happiness spills over to those around you, spreading joy and love. And I love that because you're talking about taking care of as a mom. I mean, not as a mom, but you are a mom and you're talking, and you're a wife, and you have all these other roles, but you're talking about taking care of yourself first. And that's not messaging that I got growing up. And I'm so glad that you grabbed onto that word sacrifice, because that is old messaging that I was programmed with. And I liked what you did with that word once I said it out loud. I wanted to ask you, because does your husband, does he work for you now? Do I have that? I have that in my notes. Does he work for you now?
Yeah, I tried to say we work together. We work together, but yes, he left his 9 to 5. He left his 9 to 5 and works within the company now, and we're together all the time. Yes, he does.
That's so cool. Tell me what are the roles? What do you guys do together?
So I'm the face. He's like, I never want to be the face of a brand. Don't let me do that. He loves being behind the scenes. So he's all about bookkeeping and being the money guy. And he is such an amazing emotional support partner as well. We do a lot together, co-create everything, but he's like, you can be the face of the brand. You can be the front person and I'll do everything behind the scenes. But yeah, he does a lot of that and a lot of the domestic roles as well, taking care of the kids and cooking and all of that.
Fantastic. We have that in common too, and I'll let Scott's going to talk to you tomorrow about what he heard in this interview, and I don't know if you guys will discuss that, but Scotty, he takes care of me, and he cooked for me when I was writing my book. He cooked for me every day. He did the shopping. I put it in my acknowledgments because I was so stunned by how much support he gave me and how much I needed that support in order to create what I created. And I feel very, very fortunate, to have someone in my life who loves me, that I love back, who is willing to do that. I'm going to, first of all, is there something else that you wanted to say before we close? Anything that I didn't get to cover?
I just often feel, when people are asking me, what do you want? And I primarily work with women. Like, what do you want women to know? That you matter. You matter. How you feel matters. How you want to, the expression and the legacy you want to leave matters. And wherever you are, or whatever is coming up for you, or you're walking away with and taking from this conversation, it's really about, no one else is going to give you permission to learn how to live. And you have to say, I am worthy of feeling good. And even if it's 10 minutes at a time, or one tiny, tiny shift that you're making for yourself, or, one uncomfortable conversation that you have to have with somebody, just little moments of courage is going to change your life. And I really, really encourage you to do it. Take that step.
I love that. And Heather, is there a company name, or is it just your name?
It's just my name. Just Heather Chauvin Coaching.
Okay, because we're going to have your website in our show notes, and everybody can just click on that. You have a great website, by the way. I'm copying some of it because I'm building a website of my own.
Oh, good. I'm
so
actually
check out her website.
Yeah, it's just myname.com, so heatherchauvin.com.
Okay, and that's CHAUVIN. For those of you who are just listening. And I'm going to end by asking you the thing that you told me, which is, what are you going to do with what you've been gifted today?
What am I going to do with what I've been gifted today? Is that what you're asking me?
That's what I'm asking you.
Gosh, I don't know. That's such a profound question. What am I going to do? I'm going to have a really good conversation with somebody later on my walk today, and I'm going to make them emotionally uncomfortable. We need to get out of the top level and into like pulling it back a little bit.
I love that answer.
I can't help but do that every day.
That's right. You do, hon. It's your gift.
It is.
Heather, thank you so much. I'm so glad we made this happen. You are a gift, and I'm excited for anybody that goes to your website and looks you up to connect with you, especially women, like you said, because there is a journey there, that you and I went on when we had our first discussion. You've opened some doors for me, and I know that you're going to continue to do that for people. So thank you so much. Thank you for coming on and sharing your story with us.
Thank you, Laura. Hi, I'm Heather Chauvin, and I'm the only one who wouldn't be alive if I weren't white.